Hey everyone, and welcome to the Nurses Hub. So as you can tell by the title of the video, I want to talk about George Pell. He was just convicted of 4 counts of indecent assault on a child under 16 and 1 count of sexual penetration of a child under 16. And apart from making my blood boil and my skin crawl, I think it raised more questions than it answered. Firstly, just why? George Pell, answer me that question, why? And this is a really sensitive subject for lots of people. But this actually means something to me. Being a Christian means something to me. It means that I want to strive to do the right thing. And George Pell didn't. And in fact, he did the opposite of that and damaged so many people that people now see that the church and child sex abuse are synonymous with one another. And that's just really wrong. Other questions, things like, why did it take people so long to come out about it? You know, this is back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. We're talking decades. And why are there so many public figures from this era? You know, Rolf Harris, Peter Yarrow from Peter, Paul and Mary, Robert Hughes from Hey Dad, Gary Glitter, Jimmy Savile, Roman Polanski. I don't get it. Or at least I didn't. Because I thought I grew up in a really innocent time. Didn't happen back in my day. Except it did. So the fact that we didn't hear about people being charged with child sex offences when I was young didn't mean that they weren't happening. It just meant that they weren't being charged. And so I thought, well, hang on a minute, we've got all this legislation to protect children. But we didn't then, and we actually have to go back 150 years to find out why. So in 1875, there was a young 10-year-old girl, Mary Ellen McCormick, and she had been adopted by a couple, except he sadly passed away, and the adoptive mother was unusually cruel to her. She would beat her with a riding crop. She attacked her with a pair of scissors, you know, open hand, closed hand. She never had appropriate clothes on. And the neighbours, they lived in a block of units, a block of flats, and the neighbours would complain about the daily screaming from this child. And this caught the attention of a Methodist missionary worker, Etta Wheeler. And she knew that there was no legislation, that there was nothing that they could use to get her out of that house. There was no legislation looking after children. So she went to a friend of hers who was a lawyer. And the only way they could get her out, and they were successful, they petitioned the court, was under the Society of Protection of Cruelty to Animals Act. Because she was a human animal. Not a human plant, not a human mineral, she was a human animal, and therefore should be afforded the same level of protection as every other animal on the planet. And so they got her out, and Etta Wheeler adopted her, and she married, had 6 children. One of those was adopted, and lived to the ripe old age of 92. So that was the beginning. So you're thinking, okay, well, we've had child protection for 150 years. No, we haven't, because it was staunchly argued against anything interfering in the nature of the family. That's what I remember. Growing up in the 70s, I remember that the family was sacrosanct. And so abuse against women, no, it's a domestic dispute, we don't get involved in those, love. Abuse against children, it's a domestic dispute, we don't interfere in families. So I remember growing up in a really, not tumultuous time, but an exciting time where people were challenging societal norms. You know, there was the pill, there were marches against the war, there was divorce. And so family dynamics were really changing, and we had step parents, we had people living together. And so the laws surrounding children were ostensibly from that 1875 case, and they were for the most heinous of crimes, the obvious ones, the ones you really can't say, no, look, that didn't happen. And so the legislation in the 70s was then expanded to encompass neglect. So if you didn't feed your child, if you didn't put appropriate clothes on them, you could be charged with neglect. But sadly, what would happen is that the child would be taken away from the family and placed into an orphanage, into institutionalised care. And so we ended up with orphanages all over the place, with children, more children than we had workers to look after them. And so that system fell badly. Kids fell through the cracks, and we had all sorts of mental health issues arise from it. And back then we didn't recognise mental health issues. And it wasn't until 1988 that we included child sexual abuse into the legislation. So that's only 30 years. We've only been looking after children who have suffered sexual abuse for 30 years. And that was a light bulb moment. That is why we have so many people coming out of the woodwork, because they now feel safe. They now feel that the law is genuinely going to protect them. They weren't protected back in the 70s and the 60s. The church was sacrosanct. You never spoke badly against the priest. And if you take into account mandatory reporting, that was only in 1994. So really, we've only been actively looking after children for 25 years. My son's older than that. I've got a particular interest in anthropology. And I look at us as a species. We're no longer, well, the majority of us are no longer concerned with putting the roof over our head or the foods in our stomach on a daily basis. We don't have to combat wild animals while we sleep. We're spending more and more of our time doing things that we enjoy, choosing a plethora of ways in which to make our way in the world. We've become a society that values enjoyment and happiness. And we get enraged when anyone tries to take that away from us. And I think this is the cultural change that's happened. We've started to take care of our children, of our elderly, of people with disabilities. And we actually actively want people who are our most vulnerable to lead the most active and fulfilling lives that they can or want to. And heaven help anyone who gets in our way. And so this is why I think George Pell had his comeuppance. This is what was his undoing. That no longer were people prepared to just turn a blind eye to what he was doing or what he was not doing. So, if anyone who is watching this has been hurt as a child, I will link in the description below a website. It's a government website that lists a whole heap of resources that you can go to. And if you are someone who is thinking of hurting a child, God forbid that ever happens, but sadly 5% of all human beings contemplate being unhealthily inappropriate in a sexual way with children. 5%. And 8% of boys and 14% of girls are sexually molested before the age of 16. So if you are someone who is having these unhealthy sexual thoughts towards children, I want you to seek help. I want you to contact a psychiatrist, a psychologist, someone who can unravel the thoughts that are going through your head. Because at the moment all we have is punishment. And you can only punish somebody once they've committed a crime. And we actually don't have anything in place to be proactive to stop the crimes from happening in the first place, because it actually ruins 2 lives. If you're particularly interested, have a look at the Govt project that they have operating in Germany. And all the naysayers were saying, oh, you know, nobody will ring up, nobody will volunteer this information. But people are contacting them from overseas because it's a unique program that is helping people and it's protecting children. And if anyone does need any help, please contact any one of the organisations in the list that I've linked down below, or talk to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a counsellor. And what was really sad about all my learning about this is that we just had a dirty little secret. It wasn't that I grew up in innocent times. I grew up in shameful times. It was just behind closed doors. But child sexual abuse was more prevalent then than it is now. And hopefully now we've got the mechanisms to help people if they've been abused, to help people if they are abusers. And if you're interested, go and have a look at the Govt project in Germany. It's saving people from going down that slippery slope, and it's saving children. So I know this has been a really heavy video. And if you need support, please seek it out. It's there. And if you want to see more videos from me, please hit the subscribe button. It does help me a lot. and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.